Healers, clerics, white mages, medics. They come in many forms and go by many names, but their job remains the same: heal their allies and keep them alive. The healer archetype is one of the core defining player roles in all of video games, and are not only a common sight in many genres, but are also one of the most important too. In some games, their impact is so significant that the outcomes of entire matches, battles, and even games are decided solely based on their absence or presence. But despite their importance, dedicated healing specialists aren't very popular to play or use, and developers sometimes have a difficult time convincing players to use them. Try to recall the most prominent memory you have of actually playing as or using a healer character. Chances are, it's not as impressive compared to your experience using other character types. In both single and multiplayer game contexts, you tend to see players either actively avoid using them or use them as minimally as possible. Examples of such games are Genshin Impact, Pokemon, Xenoblade Chronicles, and so on. In many of these games, dedicated healer archetypes exist, but they tend to either be undervalued or never used, or are appreciated and valued but rarely played anyway. This isn't always a problem, but in some cases, it can be. In gacha games, players don't spend money for healers. In single-player games, players often neglect and fail to upgrade their healers, affecting the game's difficulty. In multiplayer games, people never want to play them and either fight amongst each other so they get to party with the one dude who decided to play cleric, or bully some guy into switching to healer just so their team stops losing. Overwatch, you suck.
I need healing.
Experience Oblivion.
Of course, that isn't to say that some players can't have fun with dedicated healers, or that the playstyle of healer characters is inherently unfun and boring to play as. After all, playstyle and fun are ultimately highly subjective and dependent on the individual, and many players do enjoy playing supportive roles and assisting teammates more than bearing the pressure of choking game-winning plays. There is genuine fun to be found in playing and excelling in a supportive role. This video isn't about you guys, y'all are cool. This video is about why many other players tend to not enjoy either using or playing as that dedicated healer role. The obvious response to all this is to say because healers aren't fun to play, but that's just one reason out of many. In fact, it's arguably one of the least important reasons to consider. Some games don't even get that far. There are actually many other more important reasons which cause healers or healing mechanics to be not just unfun, but also unnecessary, suboptimal, or even outright detrimental to a player's experience. And these aren't due to gamers being stupid or toxic either. Well, not all of them at least. Some of these reasons are the result of how a game is contextually designed. Games are complex systems with many moving parts to consider, and sometimes achieving a certain design objective causes unintentional negative consequences elsewhere. Healer archetypes are sometimes one such victim of that. There is no straightforward answer for this. Every game is different and expects different things out of their players, and the subjective opinions of players themselves just muddy the waters even further. In fact, player opinions regarding healers are so divisive that when I ran a poll on which topic to cover for my next video, it ended up with a perfect 50-50 split. Great job there, guys. I'm sure Thanos would be proud of you. So let's go over a couple of these reasons. Let's talk about why healers might not be useful in some games, why some players don't enjoy using healers, and what makes for a great, fun-to-play healer character. Just a quick disclaimer before I start, this video focuses on the mechanical and game design elements, and does not take into account aesthetic elements such as character design, personality, story, voice acting, and so on. This is important to clarify because gamers are not always motivated by gameplay reasons. It is a fairly common occurrence for a player to use a character simply because they like them, and need no other reason beyond that. In fact, the entire gacha monetization compensation model relies on that motivation. Some players are just insanely dedicated to their waifu who just happens to be a healer, and while I respect the commitment, that kind of emotional character attachment is unrelated to the key point of this video. I may feel that Overwatch's Mercy has a personality so basic that it could balance the pH of industrial grade acid, and that Team Fortress 2's Medic has a personality so outrageously funny that he could bring a man back to life via laughter alone. But neither of that matters. We are focusing on mechanical game design here. Alright, now let's go practice medicine.
I love that.
Oh my god. Is this you on Titanic subtitle?
That's awesome.
God damn it, yeah.
It keeps getting better.
Scenario 1. I don't need healing. Or, as I like to call it, the Genshin Impact problem. Because Hoyoverse somehow manages to stumble into every single issue which I'm about to cover for multiple games. To begin, let me ask you this, my viewer. Why would you, as a player, ever need a healer? Go pause the video if you need to. I'll give you a second.
Do you get to the Cloud District very often? Oh, what am I saying? Of course you don't. I'll have you know that there's no—
Okay, you good? For most of you, the answer is probably something like to heal the team or to keep everyone alive. And those answers are correct. Now let me ask you another follow-up question. What will you define as everyone being kept alive? I'll give you another second to think about it. Alright, let's resume. Generally, in most games, as long as allies' HP is above 0, they are still alive and able to fight, and the healer's job is to restore HP, thereby keeping everyone alive. Seems straightforward enough. So what happens if we are presented with a situation where that doesn't need to happen? What if we could just prevent HP from hitting 0 via other means? If you stop to think about it, HP is basically just a resource which indicates how much can I get hurt before dying. But if a character just does not get hurt, they don't really need HP restored. Healing is essentially just a defensive mechanic which helps a character stay alive, one among potentially many. Shielding, dodging, invulnerability frames, blocking, counters, parrying, stuns, revive, increasing defensive stats. Defensive mechanics such as these are able to reduce or outright prevent damage altogether, and depending on a game's design, could be more crucial for survival than just healing alone. For example, Genshin Impact's shield mechanics apply a temporary buffer over a character's HP, which takes damage before HP. Activating ultimates also provides invincibility frames, ensuring the fancy animations aren't interrupted, unless you're Alachino, in which case that's quite unfortunate. And of course, being an action game, a well-timed dodge can help avoid damage altogether. And even though Genshin's the bigger and more famous game, its newest sibling game provides a much better demonstration of this. Zenless Zone Zero is an action game with a huge focus on team swap parry and dodging mechanics, with all aspects of combat centering around the mechanic, both defensively to avoid damage and offensively to set up special chain attacks. Notably, these universal defensive mechanics are so powerful that not one single player character in the entire game provides any sort of healing skill whatsoever. Players are completely reliant on item pickups to restore health. This is almost unheard of for a gacha game, where healers are a staple. In fact, the game has only one single defensive character at all as of launch, which provides shields and counterattacks. His name is Ben Bigger. He's a bear. He's also an accountant and in charge of his company's financials. He's a great guy. I love him. Gotchas aside, this issue can crop up in traditional RPGs too. Xenoblade Chronicles' evasion stat grants a percentage chance to not take damage from attacks entirely. Building characters for evasion and having them draw aggro from enemies is a perfectly viable way of protecting the rest of the party, resulting in the strange situation that is a half-naked disabled man with only one functional arm somehow being the game's best dodge tank.
If nothing else, you must remember your family. That's Dunban over there.
I see that nudity makes you stronger in this game. The wider the range of defensive mechanics a game has, the less significant healing becomes as a result. The game's design will adapt to accommodate these mechanics and give them all meaningful in-game uses. Layering on multiple defensive mechanics just results in there being very little damage taken for healing to undo. If the game has a blocking mechanic, dodge chance, damage reduction, and defense stats, how often are you, as a player, realistically expecting to take significant damage? Healing only repairs damage. It doesn't do anything to prevent it. If there is no damage taken, healing serves no purpose beyond insurance. And if a player gets hit while unprotected and their entire HP bar gets instantly deleted in one shot, that insurance served no purpose. Thank you, Dark Souls. In these situations, healing alone becomes unable to be used as a standalone defensive measure and becomes valued as a secondary supplement to the primary defensive mechanics. At that point, why not just discard healing entirely and focus more on making the actual primary defensive mechanic better? In Genshin and Star Rail, you could just ignore healers entirely and rely on just improving shielders and be completely fine. And let's not forget about games which have player characters that don't even have a HP bar and just naturally die in a few hits. Such design is naturally incompatible with conventional healing mechanics. That being said, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Again, healing is simply one option out of many in terms of defensive mechanics, and doesn't always need to be used. Games like Zenless Zone Zero prove that as long as players have a good variety of defensive options, healing isn't necessary for a fun, well-designed gaming experience. Scenario 2. I need healing, but I don't need healers. Or the problem with outsourcing your labor. This is similar to the first scenario. Instead of an excess of alternative defensive mechanics, there is now an excess availability of alternative healing sources. Instead of relying solely on a dedicated healer as your primary source of healing, a player is able to access and subsist on alternative, less specialized heal sources, like say potions and inventory items. If you go to your local potion seller and ask them for their strongest potions, you'll not only produce a funny YouTube comedy skit, but also purchase so much healing in a bag that there's no need to bring a dedicated healer. Although at least this still has a cost involved. You still need to pay money for potions and medical services. If the healing was free, then you'd really struggle to justify using healers. No example demonstrates this better than Pokemon. Damage and battles are frequent, but healing items can be used in and out of battle, and are more efficient at healing than even the best healing specialist Pokemon. In fact, Pokemon doesn't really have a dedicated healer in the conventional sense. The closest examples are Chansey and Miltank, who have soft-boiled and milk drink respectively, which can heal out of combat by transferring 20% of the user's HP to the recipient, which is actually a lot of HP when you consider how big their respective HP stats are. The gold standard favorite for Pokemon in combat healing is the 50% self-healing recover. But full restores just heal 100% HP and also cure all status effects. When you can spend the same turn to do either action, both in and out of combat, there's little reason to not use items unless you are trying to conserve resources. And even if you really do want to conserve resources, Pokemon Centers exist, which fully heal the entire party for free and can be found in every town and region. The Pokemon world's universal healthcare policies are truly incredible. In other words, the game places the full responsibility of healing and health and resource management onto the trainer. Even the best healer Pokemon cannot substitute for a responsible trainer, and this is by design. The exact same formula is reprised in Genshin Impact. The local statues of the Seven are effectively Pokemon Centers, being convenient teleport points that fully heal your party when interacted with. And cooking food, which provides healing and stat buffs, is a major feature of the game, with a multitude of recipes to discover in every region, ensuring the player will never have a shortage of delicious-looking cuisine. Unless you are a Raiden Shogun main, I guess. Player health is ultimately just another resource, and part of what gives certain resources value is scarcity. In games where alternative healing sources are rare, healers become prized because they gain a monopoly on the resource of health. And even when other characters can heal, healers can still be valued if these alternatives are either limited, conditional, or involve a steep opportunity cost. Take Team Fortress 2 for example. The medic is, without question, the single most powerful class in the game due to his access to the healing, overheal, and ubercharge mechanics. While alternative sources of healing do exist within the game, they all universally restore less HP or have other restrictions. The engineer's dispenser can match medic's heal rate, but is a stationary object and requires time and metal to build and upgrade. And while the heavy sandwich can be tossed to allies, it only heals the same amount as a medium health kit and has a long cooldown. And other items which do provide healing either provide slow regeneration or drain-based heals, and require the player to bear the opportunity cost of equipping specific weapons over others. For the majority of situations, players are reliant on either fighting over health pickups or being at the mercy of a medic's generosity. Even putting aside alternatives, medics are a scarce sight in and of themselves. TF2 has 9 classes, so even under the hypothetical assumption that all classes have equal playtime, which they don't, by sheer statistics alone, it's still a ratio of 1 medic per 8 players. Healing is intended to be a scarce resource in and of itself within this game, because it allows designers to influence a map's design via placement of health pickups, creating reasons for players to cluster around specific locations and thus create natural choke points. Remember, health points are just another player resource within the grander scheme of game design, and just like any other resource, can have its availability manipulated to influence player actions. Scenario 3. I cannot afford healing. Or the American problem. Seriously, you guys don't have free government healthcare. What the actual f- I briefly touched on the concept of scarcity and resources in the previous scenario, but it'll be taking center stage for this one. Health is just another game resource. Choosing to restore that resource might not always be free. Sometimes that entails a cost. At the most simplistic level, that cost could be in-battle resources like skill points or MP or action turns, or out-of-battle resources like money and time. Using a turn to spend MP for a healing spell, or spending money for healing or passively restoring HP over time. Exchanging one resource for another. The law of equivalent exchange. If the ratio of exchange is poor, that form of healing isn't worth it. For a dedicated healer to be useful, the value of the healing obtained must be greater than the value of resources being consumed. Of course, if a healer is not used because they are just plain bad at their job, well, either the game is intentionally balanced to be offense focused, or something has gone wrong with the game balance somewhere. Putting that thought aside, on a more abstract level, there is opportunity cost. Choosing to deploy a healer means that you are giving up the opportunity to deploy a different character, which could have provided some alternative benefit. And likewise, choosing to spend the action and time to use a healing skill means giving up the chance to deal damage or do something else. When the player's roster is small, that opportunity cost is low. But as the player gains more characters and options, and as the game progresses and starts involving more complex situations which call for more specialized mechanics, it becomes increasingly harder to justify using a dedicated healer over someone else. Xenoblade Chronicles' Sharla falls victim to both issues. She is the third long-term party member you get, so you deploy her fairly often in the early game. But her actual healing mechanics have a poor return, as she has a cool-off mechanic that forces her to waste actions cooling off her rifle. You'll deploy her for a good portion of the early game, but as the game progresses, new enemies and mechanics will call for the use of other, newer party members' skill sets instead, such as Melia's high magic damage or Riki's status utility. Sharla's opportunity cost becomes so high, and her return value is so poor and inefficient that players simply can't afford the cost of bringing her. Sometimes that cost is enforced by a game's objectives itself. The player might be technically free to use whoever they want, but certain objectives will be impossible to obtain if they do. Genshin's Spiral Abyss mode is guilty of this. It requires the player to defeat each room's enemies within a limited amount of time, with bonuses awarded for faster completion. If you want to get all the bonus stars, players often cannot afford to deploy too many defensive-focused teammates due to needing huge amounts of damage within a very short amount of time. To offset this, some healers diversify their skill sets to include alternate forms of utility and support. However, in doing so, they can't really be considered dedicated healers anymore because their value isn't solely derived from healing. In Genshin, healers like Shinobu, Yaoyao, and Kokomi are useful because they don't just heal, but also apply huge amounts of their respective element in the process, while requiring very little time cost to activate. And supports like Bennett, Fiorina, and Shen Yun do provide healing, but it's treated as an afterthought or secondary bonus, with their main value stemming from their gigantic damage buffs. Is Bennett seriously the only male healer in the game? He's just that much of a Chad, I guess. At the end of the day, nothing is ever truly free, even if it says it is. Whether it be due to circumstances or opportunity cost, a player is always giving something up, and sometimes the cost of using a healer is just not affordable. Scenario 4, I want to die. Or the obligatory millennial joke. This is a niche situation, though worth mentioning because you'll typically see it at least once per game. Something is being actively anti-synergistic with healing mechanics. This is typically most often seen in high-risk, high-reward, berserker-style characters, which have playstyles focused around either taking self-damage or being at low health and rewarding the player with huge damage buffs as a result. Depending on how they are designed, these kinds of characters will usually avoid getting healed outside of emergency situations in order to maintain their huge DPS, and may favor dodging or alternative defensive mechanics instead. That said, these tend to be isolated instances which are unique to specific characters. They are rarely ever system-wide mechanics, so there's relatively little to discuss here. I'd just be going in-depth into individual characters' playstyles, and we'd just be going off topic from the video's main point about healing mechanics. For example, Genshin has Hu Tao and the Bond of Life mechanic. But let's not get into details here. I'll briefly acknowledge it since it is a relatively uncommon character archetype, and we'll move on. Scenario 5. Healing is not fun. I don't want to do it. or why you shouldn't work in the medical industry. The previous 4 scenarios all covered situations and reasons as to why healer characters aren't needed, all of which stems from the needs, wants, and priorities of the game's meta and environment. If the game's designers have successfully managed to create a meaningful need for healing mechanics, properly limited their availability and distribution, and made dedicated healers who are competent at their jobs, they'll avoid all the previous scenarios and arrive here. Here, there is a need for dedicated healers, but nobody wants to do the job because it isn't as fun as other game roles. To an extent, this is an unavoidable problem. It is entirely possible to make a dedicated healer feel fun and enjoyable to play, but they will never be as fun as other player archetypes for the majority of players due to inherent design limitations. Firstly, passiveness. Healing is inherently a reactionary mechanic, not a proactive one. You can only restore HP if HP was lost in the first place, so if that hasn't happened yet, the healer just ends up being on standby, while other characters get to actively do things. That naturally isn't fun. Players like having initiative and doing stuff in games. Everyone wants to make the big game-winning play. We like having that sense of pride and accomplishment. Secondly, feedback. When you deal damage, the game returns a multitude of in-game feedback such as sound effects and big damage numbers, which make that action feel satisfying. No matter how much our tastes may evolve and become increasingly sophisticated, our primal monkey brains will still activate upon seeing big numbers. I speak from experience. I'm 28 years old and my monkey brain still gets pleased whenever I see my videos get big numbers for likes and views. You should consider contributing to that. Some single-player games actively take advantage of that in their design and damage formulas, and have enemy HP be in the hundreds of thousands, while player characters only have comparatively tiny HP stats. This type of game design is fairly common for live service style RPG games, which are under constant pressure to add new content. These games place heavy emphasis on damage as new content constantly raises the HP limits to give players new objectives to strive for. However, HP values of the player characters rarely change as substantially as enemies. On a practical standpoint, this makes healers resistant to power creep, since a new healer character being able to restore more HP than an older one is functionally meaningless. But in terms of feedback, that also causes players to devalue and underestimate the importance of healing, since they may believe their existing heal methods are sufficient and the larger numbers don't matter when they might. In these games, healing just does not provide the same level of dopamine injection as damage, as you can deal big numbers of damage but only restore a puny number for healing. Thirdly, weakness. For the sake of game balance, the healer will always be weaker than most other characters. In exchange for their sheer defensive utility value, they will either have really poor damage or really poor survivability. These are not only necessary for balance, but also to enforce certain player behaviors. If the healer has poor damage, that naturally disincentivizes the player from running into combat outside of emergencies. And if the healer is squishy, then that encourages them to stick with their team for protection, naturally putting them in the position to heal. Also, because healing has been established as an important need for these games, the healer becomes one of the most important members of the entire team, meaning they are also one of the highest priority targets for the enemy to kill, either because they get actively targeted by the enemy, or because they are so squishy that they just naturally die in one unintended hit. Combine that with the aforementioned balance weaknesses, and the healer will die a lot if the team doesn't protect them. This isn't specific to healers at least. Practically every support character, in both single and multiplayer settings, is prone to getting accidentally killed if they aren't careful. but at least supports can always receive healing, whereas there's no guarantee that a healer can heal themselves. Not one player ever likes being in that position. Players want to defeat enemies, work with allies as equals, and feel in control of their own fates and decisions. Being a healer provides none of that, because they are unequally matched against every other character in the game, and their survival or death is heavily dependent on their allies rather than being exclusively their own. As a combat specialist or a tank, if an enemy initiates a fight, you can fight back on relatively equal grounds. But as a healing specialist, you just have to hope that your team isn't brain dead and actually notices you are being attacked. So you often die for reasons which aren't your fault, causing you to get angry and blame your team. That's a negative player experience and negative feedback. For a healer to actually be fun and engaging, they should never feel helpless. They need to feel actively engaged, feel like they are always making a difference, and have viable means of self-defense which are dependent on their own personal skill and not solely on their teammates. All of this while still being relatively balanced against every other character in the game. Not easy to do. Fortunately, we have a masterclass of game design as a demonstration of this. Introducing Team Fortress 2's Medic, quite possibly one of the most fun healers in all of gaming. Unlike most other game healers, the Medic has huge personal initiative in everything he does. He is valued in both offensive and defensive contexts, as his special Ubercharges are all designed to break defensive stalemates and force enemies to run away, either by making his heal target completely invulnerable, tripling their damage, or rendering immune to knockback. He is never passively on standby, as healing teammates already at full HP temporarily grants them an extra 50% max HP, ensuring that he always has people to heal and receives constant feedback for everything he does. And while he is weaker than most other classes in combat, he isn't helpless either. He has the second fastest base movement speed in the game, above average health, personal health regen, and surprisingly decent self-defense weapons. Due to the game's projectile mechanics, his syringe gun and crossbow are able to do decent damage while moving backwards. And due to how the game's infamous melee and critical hit mechanics function, the Medic is one of the game's deadliest melee fighters. It is not uncommon for a player to jump a Medic who's all by himself and just instantly die to a critical bonesaw. He isn't a free kill, and has the tools to both escape and fight back on his own terms. He gives the player a huge amount of personal initiative in not just their own survival, but also the overall team's success, as his Ubercharge is the single most powerful game-winning offensive push force in the entire game, and he is in control of when to press that button and make that game-winning play. This is it. This is arguably the single most fun dedicated healer to play in all of gaming, and he is still not as fun as the other classes because it's just naturally more fun to shoot and kill enemies than heal allies. So imagine how every other healer in gaming compares to Medic. They just end up being even less fun and active than him. At the end of the day, there's only so much you can do to design around these inherent gameplay limitations. Scenario 6. I am being taken for granted. Or why you shouldn't work in the service industry. This has nothing to do with the healer themselves or the game they are in, but instead with the perceived feedback they receive for their activities. As with any other job, people doing work as healers want to receive some form of positive benefit or reward for their efforts. The feedback a player receives, both as a result of intentional design and unintended community activity, can greatly influence whether they view the job as something rewarding or unpleasant. These can be tangible benefits. For example, a huge motivation behind why some players play healers in certain game genres, such as MMOs, is because they typically have short lobby queue times compared to DPS characters. While this is due to basic supply and demand, it is still a tangible benefit nonetheless, which contributes to a positive feedback loop for these healer players. Some games actively attempt to take advantage of this by implementing role queue systems. But depending on how a game is designed, that might create other issues. It could create excessively long wait times for the majority of players that are trying to play other roles and characters, and be perceived as denying players the freedom to enjoy the game the way they want. Games could also use other reward systems, such as achievements and completion progress, to incentivize players to play a certain character. These have limited impact because achievements tend to be a rather light form of encouragement. However, they are still effective at getting players to at least try out something at least once.
Marketing research shows that people are always more resistant to trying new things. Naturally, this resistance is much higher if it involves paying money for something, and a huge aspect of monetization design revolves around minimizing that resistance. But that's a topic for another video. The point is that the resistance to trying new things still exists even if something is free. In games, getting players to try a character or playstyle at least once makes them more willing and open to trying that same playstyle again in future. Achievements and unlockable rewards are just some ways to generate that kind of extrinsic motivation. Lastly, there is the intangible feedback which comes from other players and not the intended game design. This tends to be a common problem for multiplayer games, but can still exist within single-player game communities too. The reality is that the anonymous nature of gaming and the internet kinda brings out the worst in some people. Some gamers are just immature and have huge ego problems and engage in toxic behavior. These people tend to enjoy playing damage-dealing characters because they love dominating other players. Multiplayer games are often designed around teamwork, but these guys aren't really team players and are out for personal glory, so they'll selfishly hog the DPS characters for themselves, regardless of their actual skill level and the in-game situation, forcing every other player on their team to adapt around their selfishness. Since these people are occupying DPS roles, they'll be on the receiving end of support and healing. And since they aren't exactly nice people, they'll likely end up blaming their team for any failings which might inevitably result. Put simply, people don't like supporting an asshole and getting insulted every step of the way. If this happens too often within a game community, you end up with nobody wanting to play healers or supports. Inversely, however, player interactions can also create positive reinforcement, which actively encourages people to play healers. If a game community maintains a positive attitude and actively makes players feel appreciated for performing healing, support, or other less flashy yet still important duties, that positive feedback experience makes these players more inclined to repeat those actions again in future. Humans are social creatures. Many people like and enjoy helping others and contributing towards a team effort, even within a supportive capacity. Receiving either a team victory or verbal appreciation from other players can serve as an intangible reward which validates their efforts and encourages them to replay that same support role in future. So remember everyone, always be nice to not just your healers and supporters, but also your fellow teammates and players in general. A little bit of kindness and appreciation really goes a long way towards building up a positive and welcoming community for any game. Conclusion, or that one thing we all had to do back in English class. Dedicated healers really have it pretty rough in life, don't they? Compared to other archetypes like tanks, supports, and damage dealers, they pretty much face an uphill battle as a result of numerous factors relating to a game's overall design, the healer's own playstyle, and the community around them. For a dedicated healer to truly be well liked, there not only needs to be a need for their services, but the healer themselves must have personal initiative, be fun to play as, and receive commendation and positive feedback for their work. If any of these things go wrong, you may end up with that healer being either unneeded or viewed as an unfun and tedious job which needs to be done out of necessity. Luckily, not every game needs to worry about this. At the end of the day, healing and healers are an archetype and a defensive mechanic, not an absolute must-have for every game. Sometimes, certain characters and archetypes are designed with the explicit intention of being used in the early to mid-game and fall off in usefulness later, and that's perfectly acceptable. A game should ideally allow for the most fun for as many players within their target audience as possible. If the game's natural design and structure results in a dedicated healer just not being too useful, then a designer should aim to work around and within that existing design and not try to force the game into becoming something it isn't. If a game is designed around some alternate, more fun defensive mechanic, then the dedicated healer becoming less useful is an understandable and necessary sacrifice for the greater good of the overall game. What's important is for players to have fun and be engaged with the process of staying alive, whatever form that may take. Tell me, dear viewer, what are your own thoughts regarding this video? Do you agree with the above statements or disagree? Have you ever enjoyed playing or using a dedicated healer before? What game was it in? Why did you find them fun? Why did you not find them fun? What is your most prominent memory of that gaming experience? Please do share it with everybody else in the comments below. It's always fun to see people from different backgrounds all interacting over a shared experience. If you enjoyed the video, then please do leave it a like to help it along the YouTube algorithm. And if you want to hear me talk about more game mechanics, then here is another video for your viewing pleasure. That's all I got for now. Until next time.